Hey, how is everyone doing today? I'm just going live here to talk about really what I wanted to talk about today was SIBO. So, for those of you who don't know what SIBO is, it's small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And it is probably one of the biggest things I see affecting those of you that are having digestive issues in terms of something that a lot of people have and a lot of people are trying to work on. And according to many SIBO experts, IBS is actually usually about 70% of the time that the real issue is actually SIBO. So SIBO is not something that's recognized by all gastroenterologists, like traditional MDs. There are wonderful doctors like Mark Pimentel in Los Angeles, who is a SIBO expert who recognizes it as a cause of what other doctors would label IBS. And so it's just a very, very common thing for people with digestive issues to have going on as at least one of their main things. And I know for me, when I was diagnosed with IBS when I was 16, they didn't run any tests. I just told them what my symptoms were. They said you have IBS. They prescribed a medication, and that was kind of it. There was no further exploration to it. And my understanding at the time was IBS is when you have some kind of GI issue, they don't know what it is, and it doesn't seem like it's something dangerous, and you can take medication. That was sort of a catch-all phrase. Was how it was diagnosed, as if there wasn't some obvious thing that was a big problem that needed to be immediately fixed, like your appendix burst or something. So that was my experience of it. And I'm sure there's been a lot of advancements in testing, but I know a lot of you talk to me that you've done tests or no one will do tests for these various symptoms. So the biggest symptoms that I see for people who do have IBS and SIBO are bloating, gas, intestinal pain. Those are the biggest ones. So let's just talk a little bit about what SIBO is, how it happens, so we can understand the next discussion, which is what you need to do about it if you want to fix it. So basically, for the most part, the small intestine is supposed to be sterile. There's not supposed to be a lot of bacteria in there. All that good microbiome, good flora, probiotics, that's really in the large intestine. Towards the end of the small intestine, it's normal to have some bacteria down there. But for especially the beginning part, it should be fairly sterile. So we eat food, our stomach acid, and when we eat food, we eat bacteria. Our stomach acid should be good and strong and kill most of the bacteria and any other organisms that we eat. And then when all that those gastric juices that are should make a very harsh environment for bacteria to survive, when they get into the top of the small intestine, there's the pancreas releasing enzymes, there's the gallbladder releasing bile, the small intestine makes enzymes as well. It should be a very inhospitable environment for bacteria to grow. They might be able to make it through, but they're not going to grow very well. They're in the perfect scenario. So what happens when people have small intestinal bacterial overgrowth is something's going on where the bacteria are allowed to grow in the area and where they should not be. So the small intestine is where the stomach, you start to break down your food. The small intestine, especially the top, is where you continue to break down your food with all those things, enzymes, bile, hydrochloric acid, and it should be an environment where the food is breaking down and then your small intestine, the cells that line it, are absorbing your nutrients. So what happens if there's bacteria in there is they start eating those nutrients. They start creating fermentation, creating gas. And that is what is primarily responsible for a lot of the symptoms that people have, especially bloating after you eat, because they're not supposed to be there. They're not supposed to be eating your food and fermenting it before you do. And so they create all of these different gases. And depending on the type of bacteria or organism, like a methanogen, is that they are producing different kinds of gases. So when people talk about SIBO, the three main types of organisms they're talking about are producing three different gases. That's how they categorize them in this scenario. And they're producing either hydrogen or hydrogen sulfide or methane gas. And technically those organisms aren't bacteria, but for simplicity's sake, we'll just say bacteria. So these one-celled organisms are creating a lot of gases, and they can also do a lot of damage to those cells that line the small intestine. So then people aren't absorbing their nutrients as well. They aren't digesting their food as well. People can become intolerant to certain foods. For example, lactase, the enzyme that helps break down dairy products and milk, is made in the small intestine. When those cells get damaged, then you don't digest dairy products very well anymore. This can happen. So this is what's really ultimately causing symptoms for a lot of you with IBS, is this issue, and it may be paired with other issues. So that's SIBO, and doctors like Dr. Pimentel and some other wonderful doctors in Washington have done tests, and they found that 70% of people with IBS have SIBO. So it's a very common thing. If you have any kind of GI issues at all, there's a really good chance that this is going on. And so a lot of you have, you're aware that you have IBS, you're aware that you have SIBO, and you've tried something before to get rid of it. And some people have taken antibiotics like rifaximin, Xifaxan. I don't prescribe antibiotics, so I'm not as familiar with those, but I know a lot of people come to me having taken those. And some of those can be very good because they don't go all over the body. They just mostly stay in the small intestine. They can be very effective. But there are a lot of people who have done treatments for IBS and SIBO, and either they got better for a while, but then it came back, or it never was really effective for them. And so in terms of talking about what to do to fix this issue, I just want to talk about some of the things that can go wrong, that may have gone wrong for you in trying to deal with this if you were aware that you had SIBO. Now, if you weren't aware that you had SIBO, here's a whole new thing for you to explore. Very commonly this is going on. And the vast majority of people that I worked with IBS or digestive issues, SIBO is at least part of the equation, and needs to be addressed in some way. So the most common way that SIBO is caused in the first place is by food poisoning. So there's other things I'm going to talk about too, and this is important in terms of knowing how to fix it. So it's very common for people to have food poisoning, and some of the organisms that cause food poisoning are so toxic that they actually start to cause an autoimmune reaction against the cells in the small intestine that help food and everything move through the small intestine. So it becomes actually a motility issue where because of this autoimmune reaction, because of the food poisoning and the intense immune reaction against those organisms, like salmonella or something like that, Campylobacter is the big one, the body gets a little confused and starts to attack the cells in the small intestine. And this can cause that process where the small intestine moves things out and moves them into the large intestine. That process is, those cells don't work as well. And so that's one of the most common ways that this starts, especially if it starts suddenly for people. Another thing that can cause this or contribute to this, and it's often something that's missed in the treatment, is an issue with either H. pylori in the stomach, which is a bacteria in the stomach, or low stomach acid. So like I said at the beginning, part of what causes that sterile environment in the small intestine is the hydrochloric acid of the stomach. If you have an infection of a bacteria called H. pylori, which over 50% of people in the US and Canada do have, at least they have it present. It may not be pathogenic. It may not be causing a lot of problems, but people have it. And if you have a weakened immune system or you're susceptible, then it can cause problems. And this bacteria can bore into the stomach lining, damage the cells that make hydrochloric acid and lower stomach acid. H. pylori also releases an enzyme called urease that lowers stomach acid. So you can have this environment where your stomach acid isn't as strong, and bacteria from your mouth or your sinuses or from your food that should have been killed in the hydrochloric acid is now not getting killed by that. And maybe if there's some slow motility in the small intestine, it can start to hang around longer in the small intestine than it should. So this stomach acid issue is is one of the reasons why people get small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or why they can't get rid of it with the other methods, because the stomach acid and the H. pylori need to be addressed. Some other reasons why people may have low stomach acid is if they took medications for a long time to lower stomach acid, or sometimes a deficiency of vitamin B6 can lower stomach acid. So there are a few reasons why we can have lower stomach acid. It tends to, as we age, go down. And I suppose there's other things that can damage stomach acid and diminish it as well. But those are the main things. So if you do have gas, bloating, and pain, and you have H. pylori, or you have issues with stomach acid, that could be part of the picture too, in something that you need to address to fix it as well. And I must say that the breath tests, especially for H. pylori, done in gastroenterologist offices, are often not very accurate. I've had many clients who did a breath test, or they did a H. pylori test, and they said it was negative, and then we did the testing that I prefer, where they literally go through your stool and count the DNA of every organism, and the H. pylori is there. And I think there's possibly, I don't know exactly the methods of traditional H. pylori testing, but a lot of these, a lot of tests that we do with our traditional doctors there's a threshold where something is only considered pathogenic at a certain threshold. If it's under a certain threshold, it's not a problem. Like I said, lots of people have H. pylori and have no GI symptoms, no problems. So they only consider it a problem if it's over a certain amount. And so I think that could be a little bit of an issue too. The testing that I do and a lot of functional medicine doctors do is very, very sensitive. It'll tell you if they found one H. pylori in your stool. I've never seen one, but it's usually at least hundreds. But they'll tell you if it's, hundreds or thousands or 10,000s. They'll tell you a pretty precise number, and not just a yes or no. A lot of tests that you get back from your doctors, they just say positive or negative. And sometimes negative just means too low for us to think that antibiotics are a good idea. Because remember, their surgery and antibiotics are their main modes of treatment. And if something isn't so bad that you need antibiotics, then there's nothing to be done. So if you have had H. pylori testing, but you have stomach issues, it's possible that the test either wasn't sensitive enough, or there wasn't enough there that they warranted a problem, even though maybe your symptoms are telling you otherwise. So the next thing that can happen to contribute to SIBO, or sometimes cause SIBO, is if we're having an issue with the pancreas or the gallbladder or liver, or sometimes the small intestine, where that mix of juices is not strong enough. So we can have gallstones or sluggish bile. So that bile that's coming from the liver is not sufficient. It's not enough to create that really sterile environment. Or sometimes the pancreas is, for various reasons, not producing enough enzymes to help those juices be really strong and to help them kill bacteria. And sometimes things like food poisoning, or a parasite or something like that can damage the small intestine, and sometimes the small intestines are not producing enough enzymes. So that mix of juices, sometimes a deficiency in that coming from one place or another. I haven't seen a case where this is really causing small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, but certainly could be contributing. If you had your gallbladder removed, or your gallbladder's kind of sluggish, and you have low stomach acid, and you had food poisoning one time, that might be enough of a mix to create this environment where things can live in the small intestine that really shouldn't be living there. The last thing that I really see a lot of is some kind of parasite present in the gastrointestinal tract. And one thing that the parasites do is they affect the immune system in the gut. They can either distract the immune system from other organisms like bacteria and fungi. And so while the immune system is really focused on parasites, the bacteria and fungi can sometimes get out of hand. And sometimes, for whatever reason, I don't know in the body's wisdom why this is, but we see a lot of it where someone had a parasite for a long time, we can see a low secretory IgA in their stool. And secretory IgA is like the first line of defense of the immune system in the gut. And sometimes we see that number kind of low. Something's happened over time where the immune system in the gut just isn't responding that well to things anymore. And that can cause bacteria and fungi and parasites as well to grow in places that they really shouldn't be, or get to numbers that they really shouldn't be that high of a number that the body can't handle it. And similarly, if we have an overgrowth of candida or some other fungi, sometimes there is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. Sometimes there's small intestinal fungal overgrowth. And, SIBO experts have come up with a lot of acronyms for all of these things, but just in plain terms, there's fungi in the small intestine. It really shouldn't be there. It might pass through, but it shouldn't be hanging out there and living there. And so sometimes if people have taken a lot of antibiotics, or they took antibiotics for SIBO, but they just took an antibiotic, not something that was also antifungal, then the antibiotics can get wiped out, and then now there's fungi there that can continue to enjoy themselves and ferment your food and cause problems, especially something like candida. It can become very pathogenic. It can change its behavior. It can start to bore into the intestinal wall and create a lot of damage. So this is another reason why sometimes people have so many symptoms. And a lot of times fungal overgrowth can lead to constipation anywhere in the digestive tract. And certainly a lot of bloating and gas and things like that can be caused by a fungal overgrowth in the small intestine. So if you have treated SIBO, but either the symptoms kind of changed or they came back, this could be something that's going on. I can't quite remember the percentage, but some of the same doctors that did studies on 60 to 70% of people with IBS actually having SIBO, there was a very large number that had fungal overgrowth as well. So hopefully this gives you, let me know if you have any questions about this, but hopefully this gives you a good picture of all the things that can contribute to this. Parasites, food poisoning, H. pylori or low stomach acid for some other reason, sluggish pancreas, sluggish gallbladder or liver, some other damage to the small intestine from food poisoning or bacteria or parasites. All these can contribute. So that being said, it really is important. There are a lot of people who are, parasite experts or SIBO experts. It's really so critical, and this is one of the most important things I want you guys to understand about what to do to fix these issues. It is so important to look at the entire picture and not get fixated on one thing. I have SIBO and I really want to treat the SIBO and then I'll feel better. You really have to look at the entire picture. You have to look at parasites, H. pylori, bacteria in the small intestine and the large intestine, and also fungi. And this is really critical in any health journey. You have to really get the immune system on board. And you have to be looking at and thinking about how your immune system can meet you halfway. Because we can take all the antibiotics and antifungals and herbs and do all the things, but if our immune system isn't meeting us there and helping us, it can be really hard to sustain progress, and things will keep coming back and coming back. So the first thing that you need to do, all this being said, besides taking a broader look at all the issues, the first thing that you really need to do is get proper testing so you can see what's going on for you. Do you have H. pylori? Do you have low stomach acid? Do you have parasites? Do you have enough pancreatic enzymes? Do you have enough bile? How is your immune system doing? And what I really like for that is the GI map. That is the best test, even if you have SIBO. And I know that it is very interesting and exciting and informative to do something like a breath test for SIBO. I especially love the Trio Smart test because it tests for all three of those gases that I mentioned, for the main things that cause SIBO. But that test is still not going to tell you about fungi. it's still not going to tell you if your stomach acid is too low. And it's not going to tell you if you have that autoimmune issue going on that I was discussing, or if there's some parasites there too that are causing a problem. So the GI map really is, it's made by Diagnostic Solutions Lab, and you can get it through a doctor or a functional practitioner. That's always the first test that we do with my clients because it's so comprehensive. It really does look at everything. And there's also, if you've been looking at these tests for a very long time, like I have, you can also read between the lines and see, you notice patterns after a while. So maybe you won't see a parasite on there, but you'll see something else that you know every time there's a parasite, that other bacteria is high. And you can really start to notice patterns and see, kind of read between the lines, in addition to all of the incredible information that's there. And then the other thing is you have to be working with a practitioner that knows this test, because there's a couple things you can do to get even better results when you do a GI map test or any kind of stool test. Speaking of which, one thing that I do when I recommend it to my clients is, if possible, for them to do 3 samples in one. You're only instructed to do one day, one sample, but I really recommend that people do 3. There was a really amazing study in a hospital in Queens where they were doing parasite testing for people who were so ill that they were hospitalized, so ill with gastrointestinal issues that they were hospitalized. And the first parasite test that they did was something like 40% had a parasite. The second test, another 29%. The third test, finally 100%. So they did it. It was only after doing the test 3 times, taking 3 different stool samples, that they found that every single one of these people had parasites. So those are the kinds of things that I think are important in the collection. Just to get one tiny stool sample of a kind of mediocre test that many people are running is often not going to find a lot. I especially do not like, for these circumstances, when people are having gas and bloating and pain, I really don't like these culture tests that people do, where it can be helpful for finding things like fungi, but a lot of bacteria that grow inside the GI tract and cause issues, they don't grow that well outside of the GI tract. And so a lot of these tests that doctors run are cultured. They take a little bit of the stool, they put it in a petri dish and in a hospitable environment and see what grows. And it's just not an accurate reflection of what's really going on in the body, I don't think. And a lot of my clients come to me, they've done those tests and there was nothing significant, and then we run a GI map and you're finding a ton of things to be worked on. So when talking about how to, if you really want to fix this, I do think the right testing is super important. And then the second thing I would say is that, especially with SIBO, one of the biggest secrets that people don't do, and I'll tell you, I do feel like this is a secret. I've only ever heard one other practitioner that does this, and I don't really understand why, is a lot of people love to do the SIBO breath test. Oh, you have bloating, you have gas, maybe you have SIBO, let's do the breath test. A lot of times they only do the breath test with 2. A lot of times people are negative on all 3. It's enough to cause symptoms, but maybe not enough for the testing. But the most important thing I see when people do wrong when they are treating this, so if you've done this and you just took antibiotics, or you just found you had one kind of SIBO and you just treated that, you have to treat for all 3 at the same time. You really do. Because if one's present, the other ones are there. And if you've done a SIBO test, you see it's not like the one was high and the rest were 0. There's a mix. If one kind of bacteria can survive in there, all bacteria can survive in there. Parasites can survive in there. It's possible H. pylori can survive in there, and certainly fungi can survive in there. So if you just do one test, it says you had high hydrogen, and then you just took one antibiotic, well, what about all of those other ones? now they have no hydrogen producing bacteria to compete with, and they might enjoy the environment even more. And certainly the fungi will enjoy the environment even more. So, when talking about how to really fix IBS and SIBO, gas and bloating, I just want to let you guys know when you are, Googling or working with a practitioner, you really have to address all of those issues at the same time. You can't just pick out hydrogen producing bacteria, take something for that, and expect you'll be lucky if you just felt amazing afterwards and never had GI issues again. So that's really the biggest secret I learned from a great chiropractor actually, and that's something that is very obvious to me, that you have to approach all these things at the same time. So let me know if you have any questions. Those of you that are watching the replay, if you have questions about this, but those are the steps to take, is to find a practitioner or request this for the practitioner you're already working with, the GI map, someone that knows how to read it, someone that knows how to interpret it and can help you understand what's there, and then treating all the issues at the same time, addressing all of them at the same time. And it may be like one after the other. Obviously, you don't want to take, 30 supplements at the same time, but not just treating one kind of bacteria and ignoring H. pylori or parasites or the other kinds of bacteria or fungi. You really need to have something that kind of encompasses the entire possibility of what's there. You need to test and see what's going on for you, and then you need to address everything at once, and not just take one thing. Like I have SIBO, I have hydrogen SIBO, and that's it. Or I have methane producing SIBO, and that's it, and that's all I need to worry about. Very likely there's going to be some other issue going on at the same time, even if it's something as simple as I have low B6, so I have low stomach acid. And the reason I have low B6 is because my small intestine isn't working well and I'm not absorbing my nutrients. You see what I mean? You have to kind of look at that whole spectrum of things. And that's really how you can get to a place where you don't have to be dealing with these digestive issues on a daily basis. You don't even have to be dealing with them on a monthly basis. It's very possible. I haven't worked with anybody yet who couldn't resolve these issues and have the freedom and the flexibility and the, being free of these symptoms that they really wanted. And I think a lot of reasons why people don't experience this is that they're not doing the right testing, and then they're not doing the right treatment. And there's some other things too, in terms of the right treatment. I see a lot of things where people take something for 2 or 3 weeks. A lot of natural herbs and even antibiotics, 2 to 3 weeks are often not really long enough. These organisms can be kind of persistent, and a lot of times they take a little longer to work with. So if you have any questions, if you're working with someone and you need some advice about what to do, let me know, put it in the comments or DM me. And then, of course, I do have a program where people who want to just find out what's going on can run testing with my network of doctors and see what's going on. If you can't get the GI map for some reason, just message me, or check out. I don't know if it's probably here. There's probably a link here in the group, but I do offer the ability to just test and see what's going on, because I know a lot of you guys really need answers. All right, so everyone have a great day, and let me know if you have any questions on this. I would be happy to continue the conversation. All right, take care, everybody. Bye.